There was a time when being a Sonic fan was an absolutely miserable experience. Well, besides like every day. Nah, jokes aside, we actually have it pretty good now in comparison to how it used to be. What I'm talking about is a very specific era. An era where it felt like it would be easier to explain your browsing history to your parents than publicly admitting that you enjoyed Sonic the Hedgehog. This was a time when simply liking Sonic lumped you in with these eccentric, controversial internet characters. It was seen as cringe, and there was a huge stigma around it. And this isn't even to mention the pure secondhand embarrassment from the quality or even the direction the series was stuck in for a long time. But Sonic's status obviously didn't start off this way. Sonic always had plenty of good games from the beginning, which is what contributed to his overwhelming success in the 90s and early 2000s. Sure, he had some not so great games, even straight up bad ones, but overall, Sonic started out as a beloved franchise known for being really charming and fun. And hey, it's not like these good games were going anywhere, right? At least we can always go back and appreciate the good games that came before, right? Well, that's actually where you'd be wrong. It's like everyone decided one day that Sonic wasn't cool anymore. Specifically, during the 2010s, it seemed that everyone had turned on Sonic, and not just the bad games, but his entire back catalog. Even games that were once generally praised were now being ridiculed left and right and actually secretly sucked all along and you just never realized it. Gone were the days of dodging obstacles and collecting rings. Sonic fans were now dodging heaps of harsh criticism and recollecting their pride. So what happened that changed the perception? What happened during this era that seemed to magnify every single misstep? Well, it's true that Sonic is pretty strong. He's fought and triumphed over countless giant robots and eldritch abominations. But nothing could have ever prepared him for his most fearsome opponent yet, YouTube. Welcome to Chaomix, and this is the story on how 2010's YouTube destroyed Sonic the Hedgehog. Like all good stories, ours begins with Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. I swear, even like 20 years from now, people are still gonna be talking about this game, and I can't even blame them. This game was a huge turning point in Sonic's perception, for better or for worse. Almost exclusively for the worse, though. On one hand, the game promised so much. A grand-scale adventure, an ambitious story, next-gen graphics, a new playable hedgehog with psychokinetic powers. But on the other hand, the game released and was barely playable due to an insane level of glitchiness and technical mishaps. Sonic 06 was universally and critically panned as one of the worst Sonic products to ever be released. The damage this game did to Sonic's image can't be overstated, and if you ask me, I'd say its effects can still be felt to this very day. And to add insult to injury, this game was released following a series of other already not so appreciated games like Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. Hey, not everyone can appreciate peak fiction when they see it, that's just how it is. So already, Sonic had a streak of not so great to completely horrid games, and the general gaming sphere was catching on to this pattern. And while these games definitely hurt Sonic's image in a pretty disastrous way, especially Sonic 06, it actually wasn't on release where the full extent of the backlash truly unfolded. Don't get me wrong, it was still pretty embarrassing to have to admit you still love the series despite the glaring flaws of recent games. But it wouldn't be until a little bit later, and ironically during an era where we were actually getting some pretty damn good Sonic games like Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations, where everyone seemed to truly start turning their backs on the once beloved Blue Rat. You see, in 2006, when Sonic 06 came out, yes, that's what the 06 stands for, thank you for letting me enlighten you, YouTube wasn't nearly the behemoth that we know it as today. The platform was only about a year old at the time, and even then it didn't have a whole lot of stuff on it, especially when it came to video game content. I specifically remember watching the trailers for Sonic 06 and the lyric videos for the main theme song, His World, on Yahoo Video, because that was the only place that had this kind of stuff at the time. Needless to say, YouTube back then was hardly what it is today. We didn't have viral videos or influencers back then. And although Sonic 06 didn't need YouTube's help for the public to decide it was a bad game when it released, I'd say the fact that YouTube wasn't as big at the time definitely gave the game a bit of mercy. But that's not to say the game was completely spared. Quite the opposite, actually. Sonic 06 would be torn to shreds by YouTube. I'd say it's actually considered every popular game critic's rite of passage to do so. However, it would be years after the game's release. Enter the 2010s, where YouTube was bought out by Google and became a mainstream media platform, popularizing genres such as video game reviews and Let's Plays. And so it was as if everyone just had to make up for lost time and post their Sonic 06 reviews and Let's Plays all these years later. Because here's the thing, and I can't overstate this enough. Sonic 06 is bad on an entirely different level. I mean, this is the kind of once-in-a-lifetime bad that people yearn to take their pent-up frustration and anger out on. Hell, we're still talking about and making fun of this game today. This kind of bad is timeless. So it wasn't until the 2010s where especially 06, but also some of the other bad Sonic games would resurface into the public gaming discourse in the form of YouTube reviews and Let's Plays. These videos were ruthless, and I'm not even trying to say that they were wrong or unfair in their criticism, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Like I mentioned, Sonic had some rough times during the late 2000s because of a pretty consistent streak of subpar to bad games. But this onslaught of harsh YouTube videos several years after the fact mocking these games and the series in general pretty much kickstarted a second phase of kicking Sonic down while he was in the middle of getting back up after the fallout of the late 2000s. And while a lot of these complaints and criticisms were the same as when the games came out, these voices were louder than ever before.
Get off the wall, you slutty fat bitch!
These were voices with significant influence, and their opinions quickly set the tone for public discourse.
So far, this game has given me nothing but shit! The game is giving me shit! No, no, no!
Because not long after, it seemed like everyone hopped on board the bandwagon. Everyone and their mother was making videos on the downfall of Sonic. And by the way, I feel like I have to say this, it's completely okay to have these opinions. I'm not trying to invalidate them or anything. You can like whatever you like and dislike whatever you dislike. And again, I'm not even trying to say that these criticisms were unjust. But what was unjust was the effect that this had on the greater image of the Sonic franchise and what it resulted in. Because while yes, YouTubers made fun of the bad Sonic games, the trend became so popular that they began to take it even further. Retroactively going back and deciding that even the once beloved games were actually secretly bad all along, and we apparently just never realized it.
This game sucks. It sucks really, really bad.
That actually, Sonic was never even good in the first place.
I think we're at the point where we need to admit that this was never really a great franchise.
Nope.
And that we keep trying and trying and trying to find this thing that was never really actually there.
Sonic was never good.
This is where these YouTube Let's Plays and reviews became straight up disingenuous and cruel. And let me tell you, I think I can speak for most Sonic fans when I say this, a lot of these criticisms were so unfair. It was like people took a microscope to each game, zooming in on every little detail, just waiting to find literally anything to make fun of.
Oh my god! His arm isn't even attached to his body! Look at it! It's just floating there!
Playing the worst versions of each game with weird porting issues that resulted in extra glitches non-existent in the original versions. Singling out awkwardly delivered voice lines and painting the entire game as a complete disaster.
Or feel the need to listen to poorly done voiceover.
Eggman's robots are taking control of everything.
Playing the game poorly and blaming it on the level design or gameplay mechanics. I swear, there's just something about these games that turn off people's fine motor skills. People would purposely unsuspend their suspension of disbelief as if they'd never seen a piece of fictional media before, just to dunk on these games' story and gameplay. It became trendy to both take some of the campier elements of the series way too seriously, and then turn around and not take any of the actual serious aspects with genuine consideration. And God forbid any of these games had even a little bit of jank. Look, earlier Sonic games are naturally gonna have a lot of jank, being the ambitious physics-based platformers that they are. They were literally pioneering certain video game technologies back then. But it was like every little twitch or minor glitch encountered completely invalidated the entire game. I mean, other games had glitches and jank and, you know, it's whatever, but oh no, when a Sonic game does it, we gotta call the video game police for Sonic's crimes against humanity. Nah, this guy crossed the line, and now he must unfortunately die. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of pretty bad glitches throughout Sonic, but I swear to God, these YouTubers somehow always found the most bizarre glitches to show off that I've never even seen in my 20 plus years of playing these games. It's almost like they were purposely trying to break the game. Unfortunately, I can't really prove any of this, so I guess that's just my own speculation. But to me at least, all of these things felt extremely bad faith. Like everything was highly exaggerated or just straight up deceitful to garner controversy and outrage and gain views. Because I guess being overly critical is what was popular with the YouTube algorithm at the time.
There are only so many times you can hear City Escape before you want to kill yourself.
Trying to talk positively about the series was almost impossible without someone parroting some YouTuber's negative opinion without actually thinking for themselves. Any attempt at a serious conversation was met with ridicule because why would you take something like this seriously? Alright guys? The landscape for Sonic discourse was atrocious during this era. For most people, if you like Sonic, it was ironic at best, and the only way to actually interact with the franchise at this point was to make fun of it. Even the official Sonic social media resorted to self-deprecating posts. Yeah, they were decently funny and self-aware, but like, as someone who actually tried to genuinely invest my interest in this franchise, this was all a bit hard to watch. Big YouTubers were saying Sonic sucked, and people just accepted it without question. But honestly, it wouldn't be fair to put the blame on any one person. I mean, even before this era, there were obviously people with these opinions. It's just that it became popular to have these specific opinions at this time because of all the huge personalities affirming that way of thinking. And again, I think it just became favorable with the YouTube algorithm to have these super hipster takes and majorly hate on things during this time. But how did it get this way? Well, looking back at the 2010s, in hindsight, it's pretty apparent that we were more heavily overwhelmed in a culture of internet irony, which heavily influenced the way media, including video games, were discussed and critiqued. And I'd say this was partially due to memes and viral trends shaped by internet culture, which made it appealing to engage with media in a more detached, often cynical way. Enter what I like to call irony poisoning, which is when the ironic detachment becomes so strong that it starts replacing the capacity for actual sincere engagement. We see it all the time in Marvel movies. Some kind of emotional scene happens, and instead of letting it completely play out, forcing the audience to actually sit with the emotions invoked by the scene, they quickly break the tension with a joke. Sure, this approach can lighten the mood, but it also prevents the viewer from fully experiencing and processing the deeper emotional impact that the scene could have offered. Now, this isn't to say that we just shouldn't have any humor in anything, but emotions are powerful and there's so much more than just humor. This is just a small, innocent example, but it's actually extremely emblematic of the broader cultural trends of the 2010s. For whatever reason, probably due to the beginnings of internet brain rot or something, I guess a lot of people just didn't like having to actually come to terms with deeper emotions when engaging with media and art. Instead of being forced to express genuine emotions and feelings, people hid behind shrouds of irony, because vulnerability is uncomfortable. So with irony poisoning plaguing the internet in the 2010s, especially YouTube, it became very appealing to mock sincerity and genuine interests, which is what I think a lot of creators caught on to. This led to a toxic environment where genuine discussion about Sonic was often overshadowed by bad faith criticisms for the sake of memes, or just outright dismissed because it was seen as cringe. People would look at something like this, and instead of thinking it was literally the coolest thing ever, they rejected it because they were afraid of being passionate about something cool. Needless to say, many Sonic fans felt alienated and frustrated during this time. I personally remember it very well. This was the time when being a Sonic fan was at its absolute worst. But don't just take my word for it. I asked some other prominent Sonic content creators who were around during this time what their opinions are on this. Was this truly in fact the worst era to be a Sonic fan in?
Early YouTube as a Sonic fan was both a blessing and a curse.
YouTube trends did affect being a Sonic fan in the 2010s.
I distinctly remember the feelings I had because YouTubers going back retroactively changing how past Sonic games were painted to try to convince me, a person who's been playing Sonic games all their life, that all the games I've been playing since childhood have been actually bad, and I just didn't know it.
It seemed like a lot of people found a way to tell themselves they were doing it as a joke, they liked how bad the stories were kind of mentality.
A lot of those YouTubers, I feel like they thought it was just the cool thing to hate on Sonic. It really gave a bad picture on Sonic's overall history.
Because in the 2010s, self-deprecating humor became really popular.
It felt like that is exactly why we had the reaction from Sega the way we did when it comes to Sonic Lost World, Sonic Forces, Sonic Boom, where the brand became so stale and so incredibly safe, where it was no longer trailblazing, it was being a follower.
And so it fit right in with the way that the tweets, the Sonic official tweets got really, really popular. Sonic's entire identity became like, oh, it's a joke.
It made me feel self-conscious. It made me feel like I had to hide the fact that I played Sonic games. I remember having to like hide my status because people at my school noticed I played a lot of Sonic games and they would make fun of me for it. And I think that is a direct result of what the internet atmosphere was towards Sonic at that point.
Being a Sonic fan, it was hard because you know that as a kid you loved these things. And so it's really frustrating being a fan in the 2010s and having everybody belittle Sonic at the time, but that's growing pains, right? When you extend and stretch and grow and take risks, that's growing pains.
What really didn't help Sonic's case was another streak of pretty subpar games in the latter half of the 2010s. Lost World, Forces, and especially the entirety of the Sonic Boom spin-off series, released with lukewarm to not so great reviews, and only reinforced the ideas that these YouTubers were correct in some of these bad faith critiques. The series would also double down on its ironic public perception, continuing to use the same irony meant to mock Sonic in the first place for its own benefit on social media. It's here where the ironic internet humor philosophy started to leak into the actual games more and more. It was impossible to ignore how unserious these games took themselves in comparison to before. I always saw this as some sort of defense mechanism in order to shield itself from the sting of these harsh critiques. Maybe Sonic thought that if it too detached itself from being sincere, it would be immune to ridicule. But even with all this, the impact of 2010's YouTube made the recovery of Sonic's brand image almost impossible. For a long time, the series continued to struggle, and Sonic's popularity even began to dwindle. If you really think about it, the series probably faced this tumultuous era of up and downs for a good 15 years, with a lot more downs than ups. But despite it all, and after many, many years, I think it's safe to say that we're finally back in a good spot. At last, we have a streak of better quality games with stories that are pleasantly genuine. And the success of the movies has reinvigorated longtime fans as well as brought in a wave of new, younger fans. And in regards to how people critique Sonic nowadays, I definitely do see a bit of irony fatigue from the 2010s. And people on the internet really do seem to want to be a little bit more sincere and genuine about the content they create and criticisms they give. I swear, some of the same people who clowned on Sonic in the 2010s are here now hyping up those same moments they ridiculed. I guess it's just how the current culture shifted people's perspective. I'm sure this can probably explain why a lot of the late 2000s Sonic games like Black Knight and Unleashed are now seen in a much better light than when they first came out. While there does still exist negative opinions about Sonic, like there always has and will be, it's important to see how far we've come and how the landscape for being a fan has changed for the better. Don't get me wrong, I still think we have remnants of the 2010s era mentality that haunts us today. Like how people still get dunked on for trying to have nuanced discussion about Sonic-related things online. But overall, the current state of being a Sonic fan is so much better than it was before. Like imagine if this trailer for Sonic X Shadow Generations came out in 2014. People would have made fun of this for being edgy or cringe. They would have made fun of it for being literally the coolest thing ever. 2010's YouTube once destroyed Sonic, and being a fan during this era was truly miserable. If you managed to avoid this era of Sonic, consider yourself lucky, because I wouldn't even wish this on my worst enemy to have their favorite franchise in that kind of state. But at the end of the day, at least people aren't making these 2010s ass cookie cutter Sonic smear videos in bad faith anymore. Fuck. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you liked it, leave a fat like and subscribe for even more way past cool Sonic content such as this. In the comments below, let me know what you think the worst era to be a Sonic fan was. Huge thank you to my amazing channel members. And with all that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Peace.